I'd like to introduce the co-managing director of POBA, Regan McCarthy, who will be moderating the next session. Thanks again, Glenn.
Well, hi everybody. My name's Regan McCarthy. I have the easy and fun job at the moment, which is to introduce to you a person of exceptional skill, knowledge, and generosity for her willingness to give her time today to speak to us about the third topic, which is preserving your art's future. I'm lucky to have next to me Renee Vara. Has nothing to do with the law, as far as I know. I think it's just a coincidence that it's spelled and pronounced the same way. It would be hard for me. I could take up the whole half hour just talking about her credentials and experience. So without further ado, I turn the session over to Renee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for my first kind of discussion, which is a really very simple point, is strategic planning. Now, strategic planning can happen on a kind of grandiose scale where you're doing these fabulous, MBA, Harvard business projections, or they can happen like they often happen for me twice a year. I go to my favorite coffee shop with amazing cappuccino, and I try to plan. I worked for a managing director when I worked corporately at Chubb Insurance, and he said, we all have about 10 or 15 ideas we want to give and do in a given year, but we probably can only accomplish 3. So it's really great to have those moments with yourself, establish some priorities, and then put them into either a kind of formal practice or an informal practice. With myself, I start with journaling, and then I communicate that in a very formal way to my staff, and we try to make this a kind of fun endeavor. But it's really hard to prioritize resources, whether they be financial resources, time, focus. It's very hard to balance creative kind of energy with administrative energy. And most of us all have the same challenges in the art world. And so a one-year plan is really, really important, especially if you haven't endeavored in what Glenn was suggesting. Those basic precautions I cannot emphasize how often, even whether they be a private collector or a collection, a small organization or an artist, executing those things on an individual, on a basic level is the starting point. And in year one, you may have to do that, and that might be your focus for year one. You might also have, kind of creative goals and personal goals. Year 5, you should project where do you want to be in 5 years. And this may be, represented by a gallery. This may be showing at the MoMA. However big or small it is, it's really good to kind of lay that out. A 10-year plan is a longer term, and what is most difficult for many artists is to sustain themselves, their resources, their energy, their focus. All of us digress and get interested in different things, but certain elements in terms of preserving and projecting and caring for your legacy, certain things you have to stay focused to, and it takes a long time to get there. So the 10-year plan is really a long overhaul, and it's something that you may need counsel for, actually. You may need attorneys to help you, tax advisors, your family, people that may help you in terms of preserving your legacy, and bringing to bear a team is really important. Estate planning is never a fun thing to engage in. It's a certain kind of life cycle. Certain artists are there, other artists are not, but it's certainly really important to consider. What you need to focus typically on right away is your budget for your collection care and its management. And that's the budget of your time, your resources, your energies, and perhaps funding. So collection plan, and I teach a course at NYU more for professional collection managers who are helping collectors, but it also is very important to understand that usually you should project out 5 years. Now, if you're DIYing it, totally great, it's possible, but then you might have to budget your resources and figure out how you're going to fund materials, and manage those in terms of preserving the collection. It's definitely separate from the creation of new works. I find even budgeting your time or having a ritual for you, especially if you've never endeavored in getting an inventory together, which is so essential. It's not just essential to preserving your legacy, it's also to communicating. In the age of Facebook and galleries and museum exhibitions, having that information at your hand, those images, the documentation, your artist's statement, having it ready to go. The art world moves faster than ever in this day and age, and having that opportunity, you want to maximize being able to leverage all your materials and all your focus to capture that opportunity. So it does vary significantly. Collection plans do vary significantly if you're an artist, whether you're represented by a dealer or whether you're self-represented. Dealers, whether they be smaller dealers, mid-sized galleries, or mega dealers, they really can and often provide support. It might not be Leo Castilli financial support, but it may be getting you to the right people, helping you, with a registrar, loaning you a registrar. But if you're doing it yourself, it's something else that you have to kind of educate yourself on and then practice it. And so you really have to think about your status and what resources are at your fingertips and how you can bring them into play. The yearly budget, year one, is obviously if you have to get everything inventoried and stored and organized, it could be, a big chunk of time and resources. And you may choose to do it over 2 years. But having a plan and understanding that the first year to get the bulk of the work done is really important. Obviously, when I work with collectors, sometimes I work with them continuously. I work as their in-house curator, or I help them get all of the materials together. I mean, I've rescued Warhols from the bottom of closets. I've found, prints underneath beds. It's incredible what people forget that they either make or they buy. And when a disaster strikes, or even a small water damage, usually it becomes very difficult to recreate that information. So thereafter, the first year or the second year, once you have everything organized and codified and inventoried and stored, then you can think of a maintenance plan. And that budget can be significantly less of time. And you should consider, what are the budgetary considerations? Insurance, an appraisal if you need it, inventory management. They're prolifically available out there with iPhones and the quality of iPhones and Galaxies. You can easily take an image. You don't have to go to the level of a conservator or a professional museum curator. You can do it all yourself and relatively quickly and inexpensively. All it takes is a bit of focus. And storage is usually a big struggle for artists, especially artists that are incredibly prolific. And photography. Obviously photography, that's one thing I would say, don't shortcut it. Now if you're photographing it just to document it for your inventory or for insurance, it's one thing. But your photographs, we live in a world of images. Your photographs are, showing your work. You may never meet a gallery. You may never meet the curator. Everything may be communicated through that image. So it's really good to try to do it the right way. If you have to batch it, do a little bit at a time because of the cost, or you have to trade. Lots of artists do trading with other professionals. Find a way, but I recommend that you do it right from the outset, because again, when you have that possibility to send up a dossier or a proposal to your curator, they don't want to wait a month and a half maybe for you to get it properly documented. And so it's good to have that. Consignment and loaning costs, these are very big issues, and they're challenges for a lot of artists, because a lot of artists have to bear a lot of that expense, and oftentimes don't document their work or get very good contracts in place. But it's really, really important, because that's when most of the damage happens to artwork. It's also when we see a lot of the Vara rights issues come into play recently. And so it's something you should consider, setting up a process, understanding the basics about consignment agreements, And also, if you loan your work to a gallery, have a list of what you sent, because you'd be surprised how things get lost. I can tell you countless numbers of dealers that have lost things, storage facilities that are professional storage facilities that have lost million-dollar works. Nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. I find out, and I can assure you it happens often. Registrar and assistant, you might not have the capability to have a studio assistant. But you may, and you might want to think about that. If you have a larger practice and you're working in many fields and you maybe have a gallery and a lot of income, you might want to think about hiring a part-time assistant to do the studio work. I personally outsource all my accounting and all my bookwork. I'm horrible at it. I don't even bother dealing with it because I know every penny is worth it. Really be honest with yourself at what you're good at and what you like to do, and try to maximize your creativity as much as you can. Directives, authenticity, provenance documentation, and the owners. That's the continuing care of your collection and tracking who owns what, and it's really essential. Okay, Vara. It was not named after me, but interestingly enough, we've been very active recently in a couple of federal court cases, which we're wondering if they will establish some statutory case precedent. It's really important to understand that they're moral rights. One of the complications with Vara is it's very untested. There's very little case precedent. A lot of judges and attorneys don't know how to deal with it. But it's good to know about, because I've seen indiscretions. This is a case that's currently pending that I'm involved with. It's the 5 Points case, and it's a group of street artists where their work was the developer in Queens was bringing down after 15 years of giving permission to all of these artists, and it becoming one of the meccas of encyclopedia graffiti and street art. All of them were permission works. They were not under contract. But the simple thing was, after the judge ruled for the developer and it not to be landmarked, he then went and whitewashed the work without giving the artist 90 days staying period to document their work. And graffiti artists and street artists in particular are a little different because they're working in the public space. They often work ephemerally, and a lot of artists were impacted. So we'll see how that plays out in regards to it. It's a very complicated and interesting case, but you can read about it. But what's really important is that you understand that the work, your rights are protected. Your work is protected from destruction and mutilation, whether you own the work or not own the work. And it also protects authorship or attribution, which we see come into play a lot with conservation. I deal a lot with damaged artwork and helping cases and values, and also giving kind of guidance to collectors. And right now, one of the most challenging areas is actually due to Vara. Everyone is trying to figure out the boundaries of what they can assert. And this is a classic example of an artist who is a conceptual artist. The the work got accidentally damaged. It was a penthouse. The work fell from some construction and vibrations. They didn't even know it was damaged. They've waited 2 years. They tried to contact the foundry who originally produced the work. The artist couldn't find the foundry. The foundry went out of business. It goes on and on and on. So now they're at the moment where the work is going to be considered a total loss, meaning the work will be paid by the insurance company to the client. However, the artist has to make very significant decisions. They don't want it displayed damaged. They cannot be conserved. It cannot be refabricated. So the artist has to grapple with what they're going to suggest. Should this work go back out into the world? Should it be damaged? Should it be used for educational purposes? They're kind of complex questions, and the truth is, the artist is not sure. So those are good things to think about in terms of preserving your work and giving others who really care about your work directives in terms of your authorship and your wishes. So damage is an area I'm seeing a lot where Vara rights are exerting themselves. The most famous area is, and the most tested, is Katie Noland and her exerting her rights. That's a kind of complicated situation because some people think that she's going over the top. But, that's where she's removing authorship. When a work is damaged, she's removing authorship because she feels it's no longer representing her original intent. And so, again, these are things to consider in your own practice, in your own artwork, how you want to deal with that in the event a work is damaged, whether it be at a museum or not. Jason Rhodes is a really interesting artist who deals with what he was talking about, variable mediums. These are installations that are made from a conglomeration of commodities, manipulated works made from commodities. They're site-specific, and he accidentally died at the age of 40 of a heart attack. And much of his studio practice, some of it was documented, but much of it was not. During Sandy, one of the works were damaged. It's a very large-scale work. And if he didn't have the studio assistant still in place, who's like a double ganger for him, they would not have known what to do with the work. And so really keeping clear documents, understanding your process, communicating your process and the boundaries of what you want to do. And this was incredibly contentious work because the estate loved the conservation. The client, the owner, did not. And actually the client wanted it kind of rescinded, and the estate upheld that it was very, very representative of the artist's intent and work, and so the work will go back on exhibition. But it's an interesting case where you would never think that the artist's foundation or estate was okay with the conservation, but the owner was not. I'm seeing more and more owners wanting every work to be perfect, and actually we feel like too many works are being kind of orphaned in the real world. Documenting your materials and your process, really giving full kind of expression to your conceptual concerns. Your archival documentation ideally could include your notebooks, your notes, your sketches, everything so people can look at from a distance and from 10 years or 20 years from now and try to understand where your heart is and where your focus is, to really respect the boundaries of you as a creator and him as a preserver. And I would say all the conservators I work with are incredible preservers, and they really want to help be honorable to an artist's ideas and their expressions. Another thing you can consider is, do you want to designate a conservator? A lot of larger artist studios work with a specific conservator, that they know their processes. These artists like Matthew Barney, they're working with new materials. The truth is nobody knows how these things are going to age out. Nobody knows, the academic conservation world where you learn in the classroom versus the contemporary art industry. One's moving at, light speed, and the other is kind of plodding along. So, that's always the role of a great creative, is to push the boundaries of expression and what we can do and how we do it. So it's really important that you consider, if you're working with very difficult materials, who might be your chosen conservator, and you can direct people and curators to use them. Is there a foundry you use? Is there a foundry you would use? Is there a fabricator you would use? Conservators are like, and foundry and edition makers, they're like kind of, they're not technicians, they're like surgeons with incredible hands and eyes, and they can be a great help to collectors of your work, custodians of work, and also your own. I see lots of damage during consigning and loaning and exhibitions. I see lots of issues, and the issues usually come back to, is there a contract? As you were saying, have paperwork. Is there a contract? And Vara rights do revolve around the contract. In the 5 Points case, there were no contracts. So maybe the developer thought it would benefit him not to have a contract, but in a way it actually kind of hurt him, because you can ask an artist, especially in a public forum, to sign away their rights. But I can say, with working with museums and curators, this work in particular was loaned to a very, very esteemed museum. There was water damage. We consulted with the artist studio, the conservators, the curators, and outside conservator. We established that we thought it could be conserved. It was one piece of a 50-page manuscript. The artist is a very conceptually driven work. The artist, is largely probably going to decide to rescind the work out of the public sphere. We personally thought that was a shame because it's a very iconic work of his, but that's in the end going to be his choice. So those are our issues, and contracts help with that. Contracts also help with insurance settlements, valuation, which we see a lot with the appraisal. What is the work loaned for? What is it valued at the time of loaning? And I can tell you, a total damage is easy to have a conversation. Where it becomes very nebulous, which is 99% of the issues that arise during loaning, exhibiting, and transport, are partial damages. And I'm always in the middle of all these people and these desires, and we have to establish what's called a loss in value. So it's a really abstract concept, but it's one that you can help by making sure the contract and your loan agreements are very clear. You understand the terms, they understand the terms. If you have specific wishes, you can express those.